starting test automation from scratch. And I'm your host, Nikhil Sharma, a product manager at Qentinel. Briefly about myself, I've had around 5 years of experience in test automation, building test automation from scratch, test automation infrastructure, developing libraries, writing test automation, and everything around it. So I might be the guy for you on asking questions related to building test automation. And I started everything from zero without any formal education in computer sciences. So I might have a tip or two for you of what to do and what to avoid. And for last one and a half years, I've been working as a product manager at Qentinel. And here with me on the other end, I have Henry Terho. Over to you, Henry.
Yep. Hey, and thanks, Nikhil. I'm Henry Terho. I'm working as a Chief R&D Evangelist at Qentinel also. Me and Nikhil from the same company, and we are kind of two different sides of the same coin. Myself, I have a background from the university and from the DevOps side of things. I've done a lot of research and academic work based on how to make software and how to build software pipelines and how to do DevOps. And it's another take into that test automation facet and how it integrates with all the other stuff that's going on now. And I think we can hopefully with Nikhil give you two different perspectives into this whole test automation asset and how to do test automation from scratch in a nice way with two sides of the different comments in there. And one thing that I'd like to share at this point also in the meeting, that if you have any questions at any point, you can use the chat to ask those, or then you can and then our moderators will raise those questions up to either me or Nikhil, depending on which one's speaking there, and we can get some integration. No, not integration. That's for test automation. Like dynamic discussion going on also.
Yeah. Thank you, Henry, for mentioning that. And if there are questions that we don't have ready-made answers to, we'll get back to you over email. A slight quick note, my internet has been behaving poorly today. So what I'll do is I'll switch off my camera so my voice doesn't drop over the webinar. And I'll switch it back again towards the end of the presentation and the webinar itself. So without the face, let's start it off. So today's agenda is to run through brief introductions, starting from there, which we already did. They're talking about Qentinel as a company, which we are both currently employed at. For some reason, my camera light is still on, although I'm not sharing my image. Then talking about test automation, how to start, where to start from, things to consider, decisions that you might be making, slightly about efficient testing, what it means. Then from there on, Henry will come in and talk about the open source, its positive and negative sides. What do we mean by cloud-based automation? And towards the end, we will talk about Qentinel Pace free personal plan, and also provide you a demo of our product Qentinel Pace, and actually try to tie all these things that we are going through in the presentation deck itself. So what is it that we are offering? And what is it in for you when it comes to the personal plan? All right, so next. Yeah, so Qentinel, this is how it's spelled. Often people ask, what is the spelling of your company? Starts with a Q. It's a robotic software testing company. It was founded in 2002 in Espoo in Finland, and this is where I'm signing in from currently. Then we have offices in Düsseldorf in Germany, and in the USA in Chicago. And besides that, we do cooperations with a lot of partners. So you might want to check our website and figure out if there is a partner next to you. Our current impact on people's daily life is over 500 million, and that's something we take extreme pride in. And there's, like, to give you a context, millions of lines of code which is tested either on our product or through our services. Our mission, as you might have read it already, is improving the quality of life by improving the quality of software. And that makes complete sense in today's digital world, because a lot of life experience, more and more so ever in this COVID times, is tied to the quality of software. So that's briefly about the company. So test automation, like why now? Why there's a lot of, all of a sudden there's a lot of content on internet around test automation, why everyone is talking about it. And is it another buzzword, and what's going on? And did we not do software testing earlier, like 20 years ago or something? Well, as a matter of fact, we did, but it was kind of slow, and it was fast enough for that time 20 years ago, but not anymore. And what has changed in the landscape? A lot of things have changed. If you think about 20 years ago, there's a lot of monopoly in software world, and as against now, when we have this democratization of software, which is everywhere, anyone is actually able to build software and make a product out of it. And there's a lot of competition in market, so you can't just rely on saying, hey, I have a big name, I can provide whatever software there is, and whether or not it's a good quality, you still have to live with that. No, things have changed. Then the Agile Manifesto came in 2001. DevOps as a term was coined in 2009, which has accelerated the space at which software is developed from, like, I don't know, once in a year or once in many years to more than 1,000 times per day. And what that has done also is the architectural paradigm of software development has changed from monolithic softwares to more microservice architectures. And if you think about the digital landscape of a company, a lot of different applications with different release cycles they need to work in complete harmony to actually make sure that your end-to-end processes are working. And if you think about the DevOps infinite loop, testing fits right beautifully in there. And that is currently the bottleneck of DevOps. And as with all bottlenecks, when you solve it, it becomes a competitive advantage for you. Would you like Henry to something to add here on this?
Yeah, and I think Nikhil made good points there, that now that DevOps and this continuous integration stuff is getting more and more daily in our lives. Everything has to be quick. Everybody of us has to be able to quickly deploy software. You have all the pipelines, and all that tooling has kind of matured to the level that it's not difficult anymore to deploy Docker containers or deploy your application quickly, or kind of even build the testing pipeline, or even like version controlling on the cloud. Everything is kind of accessible now, and through this API economy, it's really easy to create a pipeline for yourself to test every single step and build the whole application. But still, creating the actual test cases and actually validating what the software does is still the kind of like major problem that is there and is now the bottleneck, because all the other parts have been growing to a pretty mature level, and now we want to also push this test automation into a more mature state, so that it fixing that bottleneck and of course transferring the bottleneck somewhere else. And another thing is that the kind of way that applications are structured nowadays is that you do not yourself build the monolithic applications anymore. You do not control every single part of your application. You're getting data from some external API somewhere, and you have to test that actually works, because if that external service changes somehow, your application breaks. So even the nature of functional testing has changed a bit, that you have to constantly be aware of state changes in systems that you do not control. And that's also made testing one of the bottlenecks that there is, because you have to have these like continuously dynamic setups also going on top of your release testing.
Yeah, precisely so. And I had a conversation with a guy a bit more experienced than I am. He has experience of around 35 years in test automation, testing, software development. And his comment was, it's sad to see, but like in last 25 years, nothing has actually changed in how testing is thought about and how the products look like. And I have seen a couple of products here and then doing some surveys, like micro focus products, or the UI and the ideology is still very traditional in there. But anyways, let's move further. So kind of slips pretty nicely on what Henry's saying into this slide. what actually is the difference between growing your business or going out of business? And how I would like to put it is that it's well thought, well written, and well tested software. Now you take any of these components out of the equation, and you are pretty much on your way to dig an early grave to your business. Now, back in 90s, this might not be the case. You still might not test your software good enough, and it still would be okay because yours was the only product that was out there in the market. And what is it in there for manual testers or testers? Often people debate around, oh, test automation is going to come in, or it has already come in and taken jobs out of us manual testers. That's not the case. It is there to assist. It's there to make processes more efficient rather than replacing human beings. Or then, if you draw a parallel analogy with when computers came in first time, people were equally afraid and equally apprehensive about, we will not have jobs anymore. Computers are going to take over. But that hasn't happened. What has happened instead is computers have created a lot more jobs than they have taken. And that same kind of trend that we have been seeing in test automation, there's a whole new different job portfolios that have opened up, if not manual testers, but then also manual testers still are in demand. And we'll touch on that later on. So you often hear about this concept called continuous testing, which also fits in pretty nicely in the DevOps infinite or 8, as you will. And the idea is to test as often as possible at many places as possible, and like fixing quality at all the places from the left to the right. And what it means when you hear about these terms in over the internet, shift left, and shift right sort of testing. The shift left is more around like writing unit tests and create and mock API mocking and virtualizing services. So testing in the places where the product is still not ready, whereas shift right is more on shipping as quickly as you can, and then learning from the user behavior and user experience of the product, and then improving based on that. Now, which one you would or you should pick, it really depends on what kind of product you are testing and how it is. Is it something that you are building yourself? If you are building yourself, then you have access to the early code. You can do API mocks and virtualized services. But then if there is a product that you are receiving from a third party and doing some customization, you might as well be towards shift right or somewhere in between. So it really depends on what your landscape is.
Yeah, typically, for example, with cases like CRMs or SAP systems or something like that, you do not have access to source code, but you have to do customizations on top of that system. So, if, for example, in that kind of environment, shifting to the right might be a proper solution to your problems on that platform. And that's also one thing that really is something to discuss, that when we are talking about testing software, it's not always about hardcore software development where you do all the development work, but it might be like customization of CRM systems, or maybe some super complex WordPress page, for example, some framework or some kind of a low-code framework on top of that where the source code is generated. So testing the source code doesn't make that much sense.
Yeah, I think Salesforce is one great example of that, because their ideology is that no code, clicks no code. What it does is that you do this kind of declarative kind of development where you actually build flows and drag and drop buttons, and what it does is it creates code in the background. And so that fits in pretty well in that shift right story. Yeah, from there on, starting test automation. So as for any project, you would think about a few questions before you embark on that journey. You would ask yourself why I want to do it, to get your whys, whats, and hows in place. And this is very crucial, because you don't want to do test automation because everyone else is doing it around you and it's a cool thing and I have just heard about it and it's a buzzword and we should do it. Rather, you need to have, because it's not gonna be an inexpensive project of its own. You rather get your whys first in place, What is it? Is it the quality that you want to improve? Is it the release cycle that you want to accelerate, or processes that you want to make more efficient? One thing that might be worth considering is a thorough checkup of your software development. There might be bad processes in other places, and test automation might not be the only answer for it. Second question you might want to ask yourself is, what is it that you're going to test? What is your system under test? Because that's going to define a lot of questions for you, like how will you connect to it, what kind of options you have for that system under test, and then what are the tests that you're going to automate. So where will you start from, and then how you're going to measure your progress? Because if you are not going to measure your progress, it's very hard to say whether or not the test automation has been a success for you or not. So we'll dive in these topics further on. A few very important choices that you need to make while embarking on this journey. First 2 points: requirement management, task management, including bug tracking, out of which it really depends on what organizations you're working for. For a highly regulated industry like medicine or banks and insurance or manufacturing, there might be strict requirements on having actually requirement management and test management tools. But then looking more towards like new agile lean startups, they might not be actually investing a lot in requirement management and test management, rather just a bug tracking tool. But you need a certain mechanism, whichever fits to your needs, to have tracking between your requirements, your tests, and your bugs. Once that's taken care of, there are 3 more things. Test automation framework. Now, test automation framework is essentially, it's a set of principles. It's something that's going to define how you will do your testing, how you will write your test cases, how your results will look like. Then test environments, which is where your test cases will be running. We'll touch on each of these topics in detail. Then versioning, and this is one which is very close to my heart. Treat your test as you would treat your code. So have a proper version control around your test cases. Often what we see is in companies, someone gets a task of doing test automation, they start developing test cases on their machine, and there is no version control whatsoever in those test cases. So you don't know what things have changed, when they have changed, who have changed them. There's no process of tracking them down. Now, when I say treat your test as your code, what I'm not saying is that write your test as your code. So your test should not be code. There's quite a wide practice in industry to actually write test cases that would look like your code. But there is a fallacy there that if you would write a code for a code, you don't have enough abstraction layer to actually tie that code to business requirements, and also the maintenance task is humongous. Now, talking about test automation framework, I'll give you a few examples of it. Like Robot Framework is one test automation framework. There are others in the market. There are
Nikhil, just quickly comment on the last slide. That when we're talking about tooling and frameworks and all of that, they don't have to be like tools from the market or something like that. For example, test management, including bug tracking, might be a wall that you have with post-it notes on it. It's a tool for you. It's not kind of like a software tool. And same test automation frameworks, there's a lot of good stuff available from GitHub or somewhere else, but you might also do your own in there. But building on the work of others, for example, from the open source community, is something that makes those tasks really much easier in there.
Yeah, precisely. So I mean, I'm not here trying to advocate you should go for this tool or that tool, but these are more like how should I say, like infrastructural things that you would rather want to have in place when you embark on this journey. Now, however you want to do them, that's a choice. That's up to you and your industry needs.
And when you start doing testing, you really want to have some tooling around it that you can collect that data, you can act on that data, which are bugs and what's just kind of new bugs and what do you have already fixed, and kind of keep that paper trail going on what has been happening in which phase. If you're just testing randomly, for example, without the kind of like holistic framework around it, you might end up in a situation where the testing doesn't produce that much value.
Yeah, that's very wisely said. That's true. I'll touch on that quickly on when it comes to test environments and test automation framework. So I was talking about test automation framework, just to give you a slight recap. So it's a set of like framework, as the name says. It's basically like principles on which is standard for people who will be working within that framework on how you would create test cases and what your scripts would look like. Would you do a model-based testing, or would you rather do a keyword-driven testing? That's all, I think, kind of dictated by the framework that you have chosen. Now, the three key points that I think of in which will determine what kind of test automation framework you should choose. Think about the maintainability of it, how easy it is to maintain. Because when you will scale your needs, when you will scale your test automation, this will have a direct impact on the value that your test automation is going to creating. Think about, is this test automation framework something which can be customizable? Like, can I append to this test automation framework? Does it provide good enough APIs, or does it provide good enough any sort of interface which I can append to should my needs expand in certain areas? Like today, I only have a need of testing, let's say, a web application, but tomorrow my need might be to test APIs or a mobile app. Does this test automation have the capabilities to be expandable? And third thing is the adoption of the test automation framework. You don't want to end up in a situation where you have 3 teams and all of the 3 teams are choosing writing test cases or doing test automation using different frameworks. And because the adoption rate is low, and that is determined by like how easy it is to use that framework, and secondly, like how much can it do for you. If you end up in a place where you have a bunch of automation frameworks lying around in your company, the maintenance cost of them is really, really high. Yeah, so 3 things: maintenance, and then is it expandable enough, and how the adoption is going to be. And the adoption is something that you might want to actually get the information from the people who are actually going to use that test automation. And test environment is something which is one of my favorite topics. So as I mentioned earlier, test environment is it could be anything. It could be your laptop, your desktop machine. It could be a virtual machine or many virtual machines in your local machine, or it could be in cloud. But it's basically an infrastructure where you're going to execute your test cases. Now, 4 things that I think are very important or crucial to build your test environments, if you will. It's more like an infrastructural question. First is, how would you connect your test environment with the application under test? And when I say connect, for example, you have a ERP system which is behind the firewall, and if you are working from home, how and where is your test environment? If your test environment is your local machine, how would you connect your local machine to the ERP system which is behind the firewall? And then, is it scalable enough? Can you scale that kind of solution across your teams? That's very important. Second, do you want your test environment to be physical machines that you want to take care of, or do you want your test environment something to be in cloud, infrastructure as a service, where a company like us, for example, takes care of the test environments and you only focus on test case building? That's more like a tactical choice that you can make between owning your own infrastructure or then using infrastructure as a service. Third is the scalability of it. Your test automation needs might be today so that you want to run 100 test cases per day, but it might grow to 10,000 test cases per day. and or even 100,000 test cases per day, can you scale your test environments? Can you just spin off environments and scale your capacity of actually executing those test cases? And then fourth is maintenance, which I have talked about. Like when you talk about test environments maintenance, it's a slightly more complicated topic than talking about maintaining a physical machine or a machine in cloud, because you are talking about all the what is the word I'm looking for? But all the versions of test automation interfaces, the application under test, the connection between different things, different moving parts there. You would want all of them to stay healthy and stay sane all the time. And it might come to you as a surprise, but like test environment maintenance it consumes around 40% of test automation or quality assurance budgets. It's a huge massive thing, which is often overlooked. And why is it so important, this test environment? Why am I talking about it so much? Is I have personally experienced that what happens often is that people start doing test automation without thinking about all these topics, that how it's gonna scale in future, and then you might have test automation projects actually running on in physical machines of your employees, and that's not a very scalable way, and that's like high maintenance way of doing things. Yeah, and then one question that comes down to like what to automate first. It really depends on, again, do you have an early access to your application? Is it an application that is provided by a third-party vendor? But how I personally have started test automation is to first tackle the most mundane things that you could automate, most tedious things that I could think of is a good candidate for automation. For example, user access management is something that I have found in my work as a tester very tedious, where you have to log in with, I don't know, 20 different credentials to verify that a certain person have access to the things that he or she should have access to and not have access to, which are not for him or her. That's something which you can like hit off right away when you do test automation, because it's a very standard. You're gonna repeat the same steps over and over again for 15 times, and there you have it. Second thing is, if you're thinking about end-to-end processes, once you have enough familiarity with the test automation framework and how to use it, next good candidate is actually to automate your business critical end-to-end processes and keep them running. So it's going to serve as more of a monitoring solution for you. Whenever something breaks in your end-to-end processes, might it be because there has been an update in your application or a third-party application, or some API is broken, you would know it before your customers would know, or if your customers can be your internal employees as well. And by having said all of these, this is more like where to start from. But what is I think the best candidate so far, and that's what like research suggests, is the regression testing. So regression testing is something which there are like functionalities that your product should do, and you have built them. Now, every time you build a new feature, you want to make sure that all the functionalities that you had in place earlier, they still work the way they should. And there's a test set that you run through, and that's called regression test set. And that's very repetitive, because every time there's going to be a new feature, you'll come back and run the same 1,000 or 2,000 test cases. And that qualifies as one of the perfect candidate for test automation, because this is what currently test automation is best at, doing things which are repetitive. Yeah, so you could start from, to sum that up, you could start from like very tedious processes like user access management or password validation. You could focus on critical end-to-end processes, and then remember that regression testing is the best candidate for actually test automation. Now, briefly about testing efficiency and effectiveness. So that's more about testing the right things in a right way. And when I specifically talk about testing efficiency, is testing things in the right way. So it's more like a quality attribute of how your testing is done. How does it how efficient are the processes? How does it actually feel like to do testing with a certain test automation framework and processes that you have in place? And there are quick tips here, what you can measure to improve that is what is often typically measured is things like defect leakage, number of automated test cases, number of bugs found, pass-fail rate, etc. But these are the things which are measuring more the effectiveness of your testing rather than the efficiency of it. Now, I have a few selected recommendations which you might try out, and we have done that in a couple of big projects, and they really give you deep insights in the efficiency of your testing. One of them is like an average time taken to build a test case. And now I totally understand, like you might have different processes of different length, but somehow getting like a rolling average of what does it take to build a test case using the processes that we have in place, the libraries that we have in place, the spinning up environments and stuff, because that's going to tell you about that's going to have a direct impact on also the adoption rate of your test automation. Second is time spent in maintenance efforts. Now, these maintenance efforts could be of anything. Either you are spending time in maintaining your test environments, updating your libraries, updating different versions. It could be maintenance in something has changed in your application under test, and then now your test cases are broken, how much time you spent there. So all those little things that you're doing, which is not directly related to actually building a test case. And keeping track of that over a period of time will tell you like how much maintenance efforts you are spending. We did in a project that we have done through Qentinel. This was tracked for 3 years in a test automation project where things were done as we do test automation using Qentinel Pace, and they tracked it to be under 15%, which is a remarkable number. Then time taken to, I was talking about the test environments earlier, like time taken to spin off new environments when your needs grow, or if you want a different, fresh environment for your testing. And then you might also want to track like anomalies in test execution. That might be a bit advanced topic, but it's more like if you have a regression test which has been running for, I don't know, a few months, and then always runs in 5 minutes time, and now it's all of a sudden taking 10 minutes time, a way for you to figure out or to get that information that, hey, your regression test has an anomaly in it, like something is not right. So these are a few recommendations that you might want to try out for actually measuring the efficiency of your testing process. Yeah, and this is, I think, pretty cool. This Ask team might sound funny to you, but in the projects that I have worked as a test automation engineer and the projects that I have followed, one key thing that I have understood is very central to success of a test automation project is this Ask team. And now, what is this Ask team? It's more like automation as a service. It's a central team which kind of provisions everything around test automation. So they are like a team which is building libraries for you, or which is providing the test automation framework for you, providing test environments for you, doing the maintenance work and everything. Because why it is important? Because it makes sure that you have a standard way of
Did we lose Nikhil?
automation. Yeah. Hello?
Maybe. Let's try to get him back on.
Sorry, am I not audible? Henry, am I audible?
Now you're again. We drop you pretty much after you said Ask team.
Oh, Ask team. All right. So what I was saying is that this Ask team is a central team, which is very crucial to a success of your test automation. And the idea of this Ask team is one team that provides and provisions everything around around continuous testing. And this is something that I have followed myself in various projects and I have worked with. And why it becomes a success criteria in your test automation projects is because it standardizes the way test automation is done across your organization. And when you have a standard way of doing things, the maintenance is really, really low. And having talked all about test automation and robots doing test automation, one thing you shouldn't estimate ever is the power of exploratory testing. And why is it so important is that's where I think we humans have an edge currently over test automation. What is exploratory testing? It's more like when you have new features in, you define those feature areas for the exploratory testers, and you let them free to explore on the application. And what they do is they try to find ways where they can where they can break things, and most often they are not like the happy user paths that the end user will take. And this is currently what we also do with our product development, that we have our regression test sets that make sure that the product is sane enough, and then we run it through exploratory testers and see that, to squeeze out all the potential bugs that there might be hidden in different places in the product. And that's why I was saying earlier that, test automation is not going to replace humans. It's just going to assist them in doing more interesting jobs that there are out there. Now, I think, so from here on, I'll stop sharing and then over to you, Henry.
Yep, thank you, Nikhil. Let me share the same deck again so that we can get going. What I'd like to talk to you guys about, just continue with the same themes that Nikhil did, and kind of how can we get started with testing and all of these frameworks and all of these tools. And one major thing that I want to cover is how you can use a lot of open source tooling that's available from the internet, from other places. To just a second, I'll figure out where I can share my screen from there. Yeah, and you see my screen now?
Yeah, it's visible, yeah.
Yeah, it's the setup that I have is that I cannot see if I'm sharing. So, okay. So what I want to talk about is how you can use all of these different open source toolings that are available on the internet as a great advantage on how to get started with test automation, and what kind of caveats and what kind of things that you have to take into account when you start using open source tooling as a competitive advantage, and kind of building your test automation stack from best of breed tools, different kind of open source tools that you can combine and make into a whole, and even combine like commercial offerings into that open source stack that you have. One thing is just quickly go through what's this open and what's the source thing. Open source is as in free software you typically hear, but it's not. It doesn't mean it's free. It means that the licensing terms that are associated with that software are in such a way that you can use it for example, for commercial usage or personal usage without paying any of the developers anything, or that you can, for example, use that with some limitations or with a mention of the developers' names, for example, in your code. And nowadays, I think nearly 100% of all software projects rely on open source tooling and open source software. Microsoft is using a lot of it also, even in the operating systems. There's always some software bit somewhere that's kind of open source, which has been released to the community, as people kind of have realized this, that because to make efficient software, you have to get more and more specific. You have to be more focused on one thing that you do. And for example, if you have a lot of different bits and pieces, if you are just focused on one, you have some small community focusing on it. It's much better than doing it as a side project. Typically, what's happened is that these are really different licenses. MIT, Apache are kind of licenses that you can use the software inside of your software, and always build a commercial application on top of it. But then, for example, GNU license is another type of open source license which says that you can only build open source software and only build GNU stuff on it. So that's something to keep in mind there, that if you have that kind of a license, it also forces your software to become open source. So be mindful of the licenses when talking about open source. and respect the licensing and not just steal code from there. As that's one of the important things that keeps the community rolling and all of these good tools that you have coming. So I think the main best things are that as I said, is that open source projects are focused on one thing. If you have a support team, for example, in your company doing small bits and pieces of tooling, they typically, as I said, it's support role. It's not the main business driver of your company. So that might make sense to outsource kind of that work to the open source project to make and develop that tooling that you just need and you just use. And then use that small time that you might have used to make a custom tool in your own company to kind of contribute to that project. And when many different multiple companies do that, you get a lot of different contributions from multiple different sides of that project and get a lot better results for those tools. And also the same thing is that these multiple angles then find a lot of more bugs and result in better software for your use inside of your company than for like focusing teams only on some custom tooling work that you do, which might then, for example, die out if that person who's developing that tool leaves the company. Of course, there are some risks in using these kind of like open tooling also. As the tool is lives only as long as the community around it lives. That's the kind of same story as if you're developing some testing tools internally, for example. They only also live only as long as the community around that tool lives. If the people who have built the tool leave your company and you don't really have dedicated resources to maintain it, it will also die. Another thing is that sometimes open source projects might take directions that you are not happy with. For example, they might go into a bit of a different places that you've used some initial project to do end user testing, but then the developers or the main developers of that project decide that actually we want to focus on unit testing on this project and using this technology. But what you can do then is fork the project, make your own path for that if you do not agree with the main path of the project. And also that's one thing of the open source tooling, that you can always take these tools, make your own custom version on top of all the effort made by the open source community. So it's really good competitive advantage in there to use this kind of open source tooling to build your own stack and then combine it. And nowadays, with all of these open source projects, typically have good APIs, so you can link them into an ecosystem that matches your own goals in building a test automation system or test automation ecosystem inside of your companies, built from small bits and pieces that you customize or combine into a way that fits your company. Some mitigations in there to how to mitigate the risk is maintain a good level of competence for these projects, have some people contribute to open source in your company to really stay on top of what's happening there. But then there's another thing which we kind of also do is that we offer support on top of open source, that offering premium services on top of open source technologies like we do, that we have the cloud automation platform running robot framework, which in itself is open source, but then we provide the kind of running environment for that and all the maintenance and all that kind of. That's also a way to mitigate the risks of that environment stagnating, is by outsourcing it as a service or taking it as a service. And the last thing is take care of the licenses, so you don't end up in a situation where somebody can come in and notice that, hey, you're actually using a new license, so your whole piece of your software should be open source actually. So you don't want to end up there. One of the main things that I kind of touched upon there, Nick has all touched in, is now that we are all transferring slowly and more slowly into the older paradigm of kind of going back into the kind of mainframe way of thinking, that we have all the cloud, all the like computational power in the cloud, in the kind of like mainframe setups, that you have these big server farms from Amazon, Microsoft, and other providers where the actual number crunching is happening, and we are kind of transitioning in that kind of way. We also want to make testing in the cloud. We just don't want to maintain those local environments as much as we want. One thing to talk about when we're talking about cloud automation is we are talking about two different levels of cloud automation. One is cloud native and one is cloud connected. Cloud connected, I think, is the first step that you probably end up with. When starting to transition from local testing setup, you build your own testing setup on your local machine, you have the tests run every single build, then your team grows, you can have to start moving those into, for example, a central server inside a closet that you have in the office, that those will be run there, and it's kind of like a shared resource, but then things keep expanding and you have some downtime on that server, so you are spending money on electricity, keeping it open 24/7, but it's not actually running the tests. And at some point, you open a second office, then you have to figure out VPNs, all of that stuff to get into that testing lab. And then when you're getting into the big size companies, the actual maintenance of the test environment gets really expensive. One of the first things that typically happens is you do the cloud connected route, where you can actually connect to your testing setup from anywhere from the cloud, using, for example, Amazon proxies or something else, but the actual running would still happen in your laboratory, or testing laboratory. If you have, for example, IoT devices or something, the actual device would be there, but you'd be able to connect to them from anywhere. The second is cloud native. This is typical of a web application that you virtualize the whole testing environment and your development environment basically at the same time, and you push it into some external service where you can spin up those environments when needed, run the tests, kill the environments, and kind of manage dynamically the price and the environments that you need, so you do not end up with static costs in there. It all becomes dynamic. So it's much more about transferring also the cost calculations into a dynamic mode from a static mode in there. One thing that is typically discussed here is that the dynamic allocation of resources allows for dynamic pricing and allows you to not scale your laboratory. For example, when you're doing a release. Before a release, you really want to do extensive testing before you push a new version into production. But typically, that requires a lot of resources, might require a lot of machines to run different tests sequentially, and every single developer is running tests. But do you actually want to build your test laboratory to that scale? Because then all the other times, not before the release, you're actually wasting resources running that kind of level of hardware. So this dynamic pricing allows you to adjust the amount of spend you're doing on your test maintenance and still keeping it running as you want. Another thing is the service-based approach also outsources the kind of maintenance of that, and you can use it as a service only when needed. So the kind of other side of that spend is that you don't have to use as much time on setting up the actual infrastructure. You can just set it up. For example, many services now do infrastructure as code. You code it once, you code all the different code dependencies in there, and then you can build the environment, the testing environment, the same way that you build your application from that infrastructure as code. And another thing that comes up is security in cloud. Well, won't my application be much more vulnerable when we are deploying it into the cloud and testing it in a kind of like a cloud accessible machine? Well, yes and no. First thing is it will be in a more hostile environment because it's accessible probably from the internet and many other places. But because of this hostile environment, you have to set up all the security in a much better way from the initial start. If you just deploy this test environment into a server that you might have in your office, you might not bother setting up firewalls, or you might not bother setting up proper database security or something like that. But then when you want to deploy your actual application into the internet or your actual production environment, you kind of have to figure all that out. And now you have a separate testing environment, which is not a mirror of the production environment, for example, because there is no database security and there might be some bugs because transactions take longer because of the security or something like that. But because of the cloud native environment, you kind of have to set up security and all that in the same way and be truthful about it, that this is how we're doing it. And also many of the cloud services, for example, we offer quite extensive security setups also on that side, just because of the fact that we think the security has to come first there and to kind of give you tools to do actually even better shared security than in the local environment. For example, sharing of secrets or passwords. Typically in an office, you might pass on post-it notes or something like that, keep it that way, secured that way. But with managed, for example, password managers are a good example of shared secrets managers. We have the kind of same environment for variables also, so you can store a lot of different variables or passwords and others in a managed password vault where only the people who enter those passwords know them. And in the test scripts, people can use some test accounts without knowing the passwords, or knowing we can get the password from this variable, and that also improves your internal security quite a bit in that environment. Also, all the data that is in the cloud is typically encrypted with the services that we want to use, so that also gives you an extra layer of security in there and kind of already secures a lot of the environment. And I think that's pretty much what I'd like to talk about the open source aspects and the cloud. And why am I talking about open source aspects and the cloud is because I think those are now the main things that you want to use to scale up your test automation set up from scratch. Use services from the cloud and use open source services to really speed up the way that you can build your testing environments. And any comments from Nikhil?
No comments. I'll think we should move on, and maybe I'll run through a quick demo. We have 10 minutes. We are almost on time. Yeah. Do you just want to flip the slide for me? Oh, you stop sharing.
I just killed it.
That's all right. I'll do it. Yeah. Application window. There you go. Yeah. So we were here. So we talked about successful test automation. The things that I covered there were around test environments, test automation framework, test automation interfaces, which are the libraries that you will use to create your test automation, versioning of test case, visibility, OS team, and exploratory testing. What I'll do is I'll quickly run through a demo of how we do testing in Qentinel Pace, which is our cloud-based test automation product, super scalable. And for that, I have to share another screen, of course. And now just give me a heads up when you start to see my browser window.
Yes, I can see it.
All right. So as I mentioned, like our Qentinel Pace is a SaaS product. It's a cloud-based product. So you basically need a URL to go there, pace.qentinel.com. We have launched a personal plan. I'll talk about it towards the end of the demo, but that's Qentinel Pace for everyone on this planet. So you can go and have a personal account there, which is actually perpetual. So that's our way of giving back to the community. So what you could do is you could go here, sign up for an account. You just need a valid email address, and then you have access to Qentinel Pace. But for saving time, I have already done it. I'll talk about also towards the end the limitation that comes with the personal plan. For now, I'll just talk about the good things that come with it, or the freedom that you get. As soon as you log in, you'll get this GDPR policy. Just click on accept. Now, what you got here is the homepage. I have logged in. You got projects, organizations. If you should you need help, there is user guide, quick start guide. There's one thing I want to talk about here is the training and certification. So we also provide online training and certification for people who are helping people to build their test automation career and also do test automation using Qentinel Pace. So just click here, go to the page, and then the orientation advanced and foundation advanced trainings. They're online. You can apply for orientation and foundation for now. And after advanced, you would be able to build test cases by yourself, especially on web applications. Now, what I'll do is, for the sake of time, I'll hit on Quick Start. What Quick Start does, it creates a project for me, and it creates a robot and creates suits. So when you think about projects in this personal plan, in Qentinel Pace, when you have a commercial plan, you can have as many projects as you wish, and then robots are what I was talking about, test environments all the time. So if I go back to projects, this is a project that my Quick Start created. In a professional plan, you can create a lot of projects, which means you can scale this product. You can have different projects for different teams, and you can have access management around it. That's like providing a standard setup for people to actually do test automation in your organization. Now, with every project has its own dashboard. Now, my dashboard is of course not populated because I haven't run any test cases so far. And then on the left, I have robots. Now, robots is as a central concept in Pace, and that's the test environment in cloud. And here I have a limitation of I can't add more because I have this personal free plan. If I would log in with my the full version, then I can just create robots on just in like few seconds by clicking on add robot and then giving it names and whatnot. Now, a robot is what defines whether you will do web application testing or mobile application testing or desktop application testing. So how we have built Pace is it's a platform agnostic tool product, which you can use to do test automation on any application with a UI. So it could be an application running on web, on any browser, on mobile, whether Android or iOS, and even desktop applications. So that's pretty easy. Standard way of scaling things up, standard way of having test environments. Now, you don't have to worry about these test environments because that's then our job, because this is a SaaS product. So it comes as a service pod. Now, what I have here is also a suite. When you think about a suite is where your test cases lie. And how we follow is, when I was telling earlier, that treat your tests as you would treat your code. So properly version them. So our test cases are actually repositories that lie typically in a Git. And then you can link your Git to the suite, and that's how robots know what to run. But they're always version controlled for that matter. Now, what all I have here is that I can show you like a test cases, how they look like. So this is like a very dummy repository, which basically has 3 test cases. So when you will sign up for this personal plan and run through this quick start, you will get access to these test cases. Now, what you can see here is the 3 test cases, and now they're running against Qentinel's homepage. This is the way how we write test cases. So when I'm talking about test automation interface, this click text, verified text is the test automation interface that you're actually writing your test cases with. We call them Pace words, which are developed and provided to you by Qentinel. And they're always up to date and maintained, because that's what we do as a service. Cool things about Pace words is that they are pretty simple to write. I'm 100% sure, like if you go through one training, you can start writing your test cases yourself, because it's so simple. Under the hood, they have a lot of algorithms going on for detecting and locating elements and operating with them. But you just, as a test automation expert, deal with this one word called click text and the argument that it takes. And they're also platform agnostic. So you use same Pace words for creating test cases, whether they are web apps or mobile apps or native apps. So that's like pretty solid way of doing things. You can schedule your test cases to run at a certain time if you wish, or you can send API calls from your CI/CD pipelines. I'll just click on run, and what it does is that it will start. I don't know if you can see my pop-up window, but I can actually stream the test cases that are being run now on the cloud, and nothing is happening on my machine. I'm just accessing the whole infrastructure using this browser, but no test cases are being executed on my machine itself. So if I will close any of it, the test automation execution process wouldn't die or wouldn't cancel it out. But it's running through like a bunch of test cases on the streaming window. I'm not sure if you can see it, but and now what happens here, once the test cases are ready, you can actually see from here, like what are the test cases, what's happening to test cases, what are the test cases being executed, so the live logs. And then once the test cases are ready, you have the results, and you also have recorded videos on the right, so you can later on refer to what test cases were run, why they failed, if they failed, and all the detailed logs on the test automation results. But that's all I had to say about Qentinel Pace. Quick demo. I'll stop sharing that. Be mindful of the training and certification, and you can all have access to personal plan. I'll do last screen sharing about the personal plan. So we, as Henry mentioned, we run on Robot Framework, which is open source, and our way of giving back to communities through this perpetual free personal plan that you can use. So you have Robot, which is the test environment. You have suites, which are version test cases, dashboards, scheduling, a lot of things that you can read about. And 60 minutes per month free execution time for every month, which tops up in the starting of the month. And with those words, thank you so much. I close my speech, and should you have questions, either write them down or ask them, because I think we ran our time. It's 11 o'clock. But if you have questions, just write them here, or then send us to us, and then we will answer back.
Yeah, and I can stay on the line for just a bit. One thing also is that if you have any open source projects that you are managing, for example, in GitHub or somewhere else, and looking for a testing or test automation tools, we also offer the kind of like an open source project license for those projects that doesn't have the 60 minutes a month limitation. If that project is something that is kind of publicly available, we can deem that it's for a good cause, so we can give away also totally free access for those kinds of projects.
Yeah, like university projects that we deal with, or non-profit organizations that then you have access to the entire scalable platform that there is without any limitations.
Yeah. And what else? I answered some questions about the API and in chat. Well, I think the best place to get information is help.pace.qentinel.com. There's a lot of nice help documentation written by Nikhil, actually, so that's good. We also have Swagger documentation for the APIs that you can find also, and a lot of like data warehousing APIs where you can get all the data if you don't want to use R graphs, or you have some Grafana or centralized data radiators in your company. You can get all the data out of there. And to kind of wrap up the test automation side of it, we think that the future is in open source and in cloud services based on open source, and that's why we are doing what we're doing.
Yeah, that's great. So if there are no further questions, please write us at info@qentinel.com, or I'll write our email addresses as well here. But if you don't have any questions so far, then I think we are good to say bye for now. And thank you for joining in. Thank you for listening to us for 2 minutes over an hour. Sorry for that. And have a great day.
Yep.
All right.
Bye. Thank you.